I love skinny pocket knives.
It's not too small, it's too thin.
Hello, yes, I don't know why, but I do love skinny, shapeless knives.
Most likely because you are a skinny, shapeless man.
Well, I think one of the main reasons is that I can fit it in the same pocket as my phone. And my phone's like a decent-ish sized, I'm reaching for it, I'm filming on it. It's like a larger smartphone, so when you have a bigger knife in there, it really can start to get a bit sort of busy in the pocket. And I like to have my keys in a completely separate pocket because they scratch up things like knives and phones. So skinny knives for pure EDC jobs, I always really enjoy. And this is the CJRB Ria. And this is cool for two reasons. The first is that it's another micarta handled folding knife, which is starting to thankfully become a more common thing. I really like micarta as a handle scale material, and it seemed like the industry had sort of shoehorned it into fixed blades only for the longest of times. Every now and then you'd get a company doing a polished micarta run of something, but thankfully it's starting to become more mainstream because it's a very nice natural feeling, although it is entirely synthetic material that retains grip even when it's covered in things like oil or water, and also I think looks quite nice as well in a sort of somewhat rustic or old-fashioned way. Another cool thing about the CJRB if you will, Ria, is that it's got the new steel that artisan are sort of pioneering called RPM9. So the origins of that name are unfamiliar to me. Maybe AR stands for artisan and RPM9 is RPM is a company that made it for them, or maybe they're just trying to appeal to the high octane Western man with allusions to guns and powerful engines. Who knows? But it's a new steel. So in this review, I'll be testing the knife and also the steel. We'll be doing some edge testing and some stress testing and things of that nature. And overall, it's a knife with a nice first impression on me. I always like things quite simple. It's got a decent sized blade. It's just about on the 3 inches, and it's got a deep carry pocket clip and a liner lock. So pretty basic thumb stud deploying, ball bearingy, washery folding knife from the budget line of artisan cutlery, which is CJRB, who just have the worst logo. I mean, it's just messy. It's 4 letters sort of blobbed into each other. CJRB, it's hard to say. I don't know. I'd rethink it, guys, if I was you. But anyway, that aside, let's show it next to some other knives so you can get a decent idea of how big it is. So here it is next to this is my titaniumed Spyderco Delica. It's about the same length. Looking at the spine thickness, also about the same. Just remembering, of course, though, that the Delica has a slightly taller blade, able to terminate to a cutting edge over a greater length of time. So sort of feels like it's a slightly better slicer. These both have identical edges at the moment. This is next to the Wee Knives 620, I think. Slightly thicker spine, much more expensive knife. M390 steel on this guy, and this is of course the RPM9. The murdered out Spyderco Tenacious, much taller spade or leaf shaped blade there. Real Steel Mini Metamorph, also with a micarta handle. Slightly lighter micarta color, obviously, and also not as covered in crap as this one's been, because I've been using this one quite extensively. And the CRKT CEO there, an even skinnier knife, an even thinner or skinnier blade as well. Real kind of little spike-like knife. All right, so now you know what it looks like next to some other stuff. Let's do a little montage just to show that I have been using it for the last 3-4 weeks or so since it arrived. It's actually had a pretty good run, so fairly broad range of things, both for the purpose of testing and also incidentally. Let's have a look.
Don't you know what you're expecting? Shouldn't get the clue how bad this we go. Don't you know? No more art. And as I look to the horizon, not a cloud, clouds and stormy weather's go too cold. Seems like it breaks back out of nowhere. All around you is not what you foretold. You never see it coming.
Yeah, a bit awkward when that happens. It's got a very sort of shiny lock. The locking leaf is kind of like almost over polished looking, and in something that I'm finding it difficult to replicate in, you know, when I want it to happen, it does have a bit of a slippy lock. So bit of a flaw there, hard to get past or torque that down. It's a folding knife with a lock, so you're just going to treat it like a folding knife with a lock. You're going to not be as hesitant to put it in stuff that may have a slight, pull up that might close the blade on your hand. When you're working with a slip joint, you treat your knife as a slip joint. When you're working with a folding knife, you want to be able to treat it like a locking folding knife. When you're working with a locking folding knife, you want to be able to treat it as such as well. So a little bit disheartening and a little bit of a worry with the lock strength or just function, I suppose. This is another thing about thin, skinny knives. There's two things about skinny knives that you're generally going to have to either really well machine or just be aware of, is that the build quality is always going to be a little bit difficult to get those big, strong locks in place. It's a much smaller locking leaf. It's probably only about 1 centimeter across the whole locking leaf, whereas other knives you'll get maybe 1.5 to 2 centimeters of full, contact from your locking or from your frame lock or line lock or whatever sort of lock you're using. That's just a part of pushing all the knife into something that is very skinny this way. Now, this may not be on every knife, but it is on this knife. And I only have this knife, so if you have other reviewers that you trust and their knives are fine, and you watch 9 other reviews on it and 1 in 10 is my knife, then hey, maybe that's cool with you, but I've got to let you know these things, as much as people often don't like to hear them. Another thing about the skinnier, I keep wanting to say thin, but the skinnier knives is that to get a good slicing cutting edge, they've got less distance to travel. Now, CJRB have mitigated it a little bit as best as they can by kind of blooming out this blade as best as they could without obviously adding too much height to it. So you've got a bit more of a sort of leafy or a spadey sort of chubbier tip going out here. This cutting portion here is about as good as they could have done. That being said, something like the Delica is still going to slice a little bit better because you've got a longer time to get to that cutting edge from the spine. So there's that, but in practice, as a light use EDC knife, just cutting individual materials and not particularly cutting too much that has any sort of stick or pull through to it, it's absolutely fine. It's cut absolutely, no worries at all. I haven't ever noticed that unless I've manufactured something like cutting some sticky, thick cheese, that this is particularly poor at slicing or cutting, but it's just something to point out, So yeah, bit of a mixed bag in terms of its performance and reliability, I would say. But it's a nicely designed knife. Let's have a look at how this steel goes, where it's always nice to have something new. From what I can tell, RPM9 is a powdered material version. Maybe that's what the PM stands for. Yeah, it's probably all just company and practice abbreviations. RPM9 is a 9CR18 MOV particle powder metallurgy steel. So it's going to perform quite similarly to that, I guess. So let's we're already in the knife lab, but let's go to the knife lab anyway and do some steel testing on it. Alrighty then, young, what are we calling you again? Rocky? Wally? Let's see how this steel goes in an edge retention contest. We're cutting the twisted sisal rope with the front forward portion of the blade until it no longer slices a held sheet of paper. Like so.
Please don't take off my mask, revealing dark.
The knife has developed a dull spot at 250 slices of rope, so I'll call the edge test over there. That's a pretty good result. That's approaching sort of D2 levels of edge retention, not quite there yet, but for a stainless steel that's going to resist rust easier than D2, to perform at this level is pretty heartening. It's not quite what I've had sort of higher end steels do at this 17 degree edge I do. The best set of data to compare this to perhaps is the Mule series data that I collected late last year, or throughout last year really. They were all 17 degree edges as well. You're looking at this competing fairly well with something like BD1, or something like that, AOS 10, those sorts of levels of lower end but still good stainless steels. So overall, it gets a good grade on sharpening. It gets a pretty decent score for the price and for the intention for edge retention. RPM9 is certainly good stuff. Now, one other thing I want to do with it is, just because not everyone has one of these fancy KME things to sharpen the knife on, so I'm just going to dull the thing and then just resharpen it on a pretty rudimentary sharpener. This is a $50 work sharp combination field sharpener thing. So let's just use Bricky's dick here.
The elements in me were formed in the endless furnaces of time, to wind up here on this wall, molested by fools.
Nice and crusty edge now. And yeah, just give it a quick spin, see for sharpening ability how it goes. Easy as piss on a really rudimentary sharpening system, so good job. Great budget steel. Alright, so just to test windy. To To test the edge stability of the steel, I'm just going to do some battening into this hard seasoned bit of pine. Don't do this is stupid. And remember, my thoughts on the lock were from before I did this, so this wasn't what made the lock weak, okay? So we just got a sharp knife once again, still the 17-degree edge. Just gonna make sure it still does that after a few of these. Well, a minor loss in sharpness, but no real noticeable rolls or chips or anything like that. So pretty stable stuff. So overall, it's a good steel. Like, it's nice to see investment in budget, high quality steels that aren't going to obviously cut a huge amount compared to something like S110V, but to put them on, you know, $50 knives, pretty good. This is probably near the top of the budget steel line. It's certainly better than something like HCR13 or 420 HC, or you know, it's probably matching there with like VG10 and stuff like that. I can probably get slightly better edge retention out of VG10 on Spydercos in the past, but it's definitely a good budget steel. Whether it was entirely necessary, I don't know. It seems stout enough, even at a fine edge, to not worry about completely chipping out. That was some pretty dry, nasty old pine fence posts I was smacking into. Held its edge fairly well. Maybe some slight loss or slight crunching. Yeah, maybe a slight hiccup point on there, but really nothing catastrophic that you couldn't probably just strop out. So pretty good for a 17-degree per side mirror polished edge to impact like that and survive. So overall, it's an interesting new steel package. Hey, if it's proprietary to Artisan, I guess it's definitely a selling point for them. The general knife design and package I really like. I love how the blade looks. I love the micarta handles and the general footprint of the thing. Just that locking issue is something that I can't really get past. Definitely need to let you all know about it. It's just how the cookie crumbled in this particular case. So that's this review on the CJRB Ria, and we'll see you all in the next video.